The documentaries, fictional stories, and poems on this channel contain mature themes including psychological horror, violence, death, self-harm, mental health crises, and other disturbing subject matter. If you're sensitive to dark content, this may not be for you. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Ahoy there, castaways. I am the Howlerist. Tonight we sail to the bottom of the world, to a place so remote that even the maps forget it exists. A young mother, a dangerous man, and an island that should be empty, but isn't. Something circles in the mist above these cliffs, something old. If this is your first time drifting into these waters, hit subscribe and join the pack. You don't want to be out here alone. Now settle in, travelers. The tide is pulling us in, and there is no turning back. The Auckland Islands. Chapter 1. Landfall. The hull struck rock, and the sound went through Molly like a blade through tin. She grabbed the cabin frame with one hand and held Gracie against her chest with the other, pressing the baby's head into her collarbone as the yacht lurched sideways and ground to a stop. The engine died. Water slapped against the side of the boat in the sudden quiet. Then Ray was shouting from the deck, telling her to move, to get up, to bring the bags. She climbed the steps into gray light. The Auckland Islands rose around them like something dead breaking through the ocean floor. Black cliffs streaked white with bird waste. Scrub that clung to the rock like it was trying not to fall. Mist sitting low over everything, thick enough that the tops of the cliffs just disappeared into it, as though the island had no top. Just went on upward forever. Molly had never seen anywhere so empty. The silence had weight to it. Even the sea seemed quieter here, like the water knew better than to make too much noise. Ray was already throwing gear onto the rocks. Tent, tarps, 2 rifles wrapped in canvas, boxes of ammunition, canned food, water containers, rope, tools, a medical kit he had packed himself. He moved with the kind of efficiency that comes from rehearsal. Molly watched him work and understood that he had been planning this for a long time. Months, maybe. Before the officers. Before any of it. This had always been his way out. Gracie stirred against Molly's neck and made a small sound. 8 months old. She had Ray's dark hair and Molly's mouth, and she was warm and solid and real. Molly kissed her head and breathed in that smell. Milk and skin and something sweet underneath that was just Gracie. And for a moment the cliffs and the mist and the cold didn't matter. "Stop standing there," Ray said without looking up. "Get the food bags off the deck." Molly shifted Gracie to her hip and started carrying bags to shore. The rocks were slick with weed, and she had to go slowly, one hand always on the baby. Ray didn't offer to take her. He never did. Gracie was Molly's job. Everything else was his. They set up camp in a flat stretch of ground between the beach and the scrub line, sheltered from the wind by a ridge of black rock. Ray had the tent up in 20 minutes. He built a fire without asking for help and sat beside it, staring out at the water where the yacht sat tilted on the rocks. It wasn't going anywhere. Neither were they. "How long?" Molly asked. "We're not going back." He didn't look at her. "This is home now. Gracie needs what I tell you she needs." Now he looked at her. That flat stare. "We've got formula. We've got what we need. This isn't a discussion." Molly sat down and held her daughter and said nothing. There was no point. There had never been any point. Ray didn't have discussions. He made decisions, and you lived inside them. The next morning, Ray walked Molly down to the yacht. He didn't explain why, just told her to come, to bring Gracie. They stood on the rocks, and Molly watched him climb aboard and disappear below deck. She heard banging, crunching, the sound of things being ripped apart. When he came back up, he was carrying the radio, or what was left of it. He had smashed it apart with the back of an axe. Wires trailing, casing cracked open. He dropped it into the water without a word, then went below again. More sounds. Something heavy being struck over and over. When he climbed off the yacht for the last time, the boat was sitting lower in the water, sinking slowly from holes he had punched through the bottom. "There," he said. He looked at Molly's face, at whatever she wasn't managing to hide, and something moved across his expression that might have been satisfaction. No point holding on to things that aren't coming back. They walked back to camp. Molly didn't look at the yacht again. She understood. There was no way off this island unless Ray decided there was, and Ray had decided there wasn't. She held Gracie, walking onward while keeping her face empty, saying nothing. Chapter 2. Routine. She had loved him once, or thought she had. He was certain about everything in a way that made the world feel simpler. He knew how things worked. He knew what was wrong with the country, with the government, with the banks and the courts and the police. He explained it all to her in those early months, patient at first, then less patient when she asked questions he thought were stupid. The laws they make aren't real laws, he told her. They're contracts, and I never signed any contract. They have no authority over me. None. Molly didn't understand it. Not really. But Ray believed it so completely that doubting him felt like doubting gravity. When he talked about the officers, it was like he was talking about a blocked drain. Something that had happened to him, not something he had done. "They came onto my property," he said. "They came with their uniforms and their attitude. What did they expect?" He never said their names. Never wondered if they had families. 2 men dead on his kitchen floor, and Ray talked about it like he had to put down a dog that bit him. That was when Molly stopped asking questions. Not because she was satisfied with his answers, but because she was afraid of them. The days on the island took shape around his orders. He told Molly what to do, and she did it. Gather wood, haul water from the stream, check the fish trap he had built in the shallows, gut whatever he caught or shot. He killed a seal in the 3rd week and told her to butcher it. Her hand shook. The knife slipped constantly, and she couldn't find the right angle, couldn't separate the skin from the fat. And the blood was everywhere, hot and dark and reeking. "Give it here." He shouldered her aside and took the knife. Watch what I'm doing." She watched. She always watched. The angle of the blade, where to cut, how to work the joints. Gracie cried from the tent, and Molly moved toward her. "Leave her. She's fine. You need to learn this." Molly stayed, watched him finish. Her hands were red to the wrists, and the smell clung to her skin for days. "You'll do the next one," he said, "and you won't mess it up." By the second month, Molly could gut a fish without thinking. She could tie knots that held in rough weather and rebuild the trap when high tides washed it out. She hauled water and gathered wood and maintained the camp, and none of it felt difficult anymore. Her body had changed. Her hands were rough, her arms were stronger, and she moved through the daily work with a kind of blank efficiency that Ray approved of, or at least stopped criticizing. Gracie was crawling now. 9 months. She pulled herself across the sand and grabbed at shells and seaweed and laughed at the gulls. Molly kept her close, always within arm's reach, always between Molly and whatever else was happening. When Ray shouted, Molly would pick Gracie up and hold her until his voice dropped. The baby would press her face into Molly's neck, and Molly would hum to her quietly the lullaby her mother used to sing. It was the only gentle sound on the island. One night in the second month, Molly burned the rice. A small thing. She had been changing Gracie, and the pot boiled dry and the rice stuck and blackened. Ray looked at it and looked at her, and his face went very still. "Get out of the tent." "Ray, it's just rice. I can get out." He took Gracie from her arms. Not roughly, not gently, just took her. Molly reached for the baby, and Ray stepped back and held Gracie against his chest. "She stays. You go. You can't. Outside, now. You can come back in the morning when you've learned to pay attention." Molly stood outside the tent on the black rocks in the wind and the cold, and listened to her daughter crying inside. Gracie cried for a long time. Ray didn't comfort her. Eventually, the crying stopped, which was worse, because Molly didn't know if it meant Gracie had fallen asleep or just given up. She sat against the rock shelf, pulling her jacket around herself and shaking until it became just another sensation, like the cold, like the sound of the sea, like the understanding that settled into her bones and stayed there. He would do anything to control her, anything, even use Gracie as leverage, especially that. In the morning, Ray unzipped the tent and handed Gracie out to her like nothing had happened. Molly took her daughter, held her, and said nothing. Ray made coffee and talked about his plans for the day. Chapter 3. The Bird. The bird appeared in the 6th week. Molly came out of the tent with Gracie and saw Ray standing very still on the beach, rifle at his side, staring up. She followed his gaze. Something was moving in the mist above the cliffs, a shape, circling. At first, she thought it was a trick of the fog, the way gray things shift and seem to move when you stare too long. Then, it dropped below the mist line, and she saw it clearly, and her breath stopped. It was enormous. Wings wider than any bird she had ever seen, wider than seemed possible or right, spread out flat and steady against the gray sky. It didn't flap, it just hung there, tilting on the wind, carving slow circles above them. The body was thick and dark, brown, so deep it was almost black. And even from that distance, Molly could see the talons hanging beneath it, long and curved like something designed for one single purpose. The head turned, not a quick bird-like movement. Slow, deliberate. Yellow eyes found them and held. Gracie made a sound, not a cry, something closer to a coo, curious, and reached one hand toward the sky. The bird's circle tightened. It dropped lower by 10 feet, 20, and Molly felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the wind. The bird was watching the baby. She was certain of it. Not the camp, not the fire, not the two adults. The baby. Molly stepped back toward the tent. The bird held its circle for another long moment, then tilted its wings and rose, climbing fast, and vanished into the mist like it had never been there at all. "Big bastard. Some kind of eagle," Ray said. He hadn't raised the rifle. It was looking at us. "It's a bird, Molly. It looks at everything." It was looking at Gracie. Ray made a sound in his throat, dismissive, a sound she had heard 1,000 times. The sound that meant she was being stupid and emotional, and he didn't have time for it. He walked back to camp and started sorting supplies. Molly took Gracie inside the tent and zipped it shut and sat there in the dim canvas light, holding her daughter, listening to the wind, waiting for the sound of wings that didn't come. The bird came back, every few days at first, then more often. It would appear in the mist, circling, always circling. Sometimes high and distant, sometimes low enough that Molly could see the individual feathers on its wings, dark and ragged at the tips, and the massive curved beak, and those eyes that seemed to carry their own light. It never came close enough to threaten. It just watched, patient, unhurried, like it was learning them. Ray shot at it once from the beach. The sound cracked across the water and echoed off the cliffs, and the bird didn't flinch, didn't change its circle. The bullet went wide, and the eagle just kept turning, slow and steady, as though the rifle was irrelevant, as though Ray was irrelevant. "Next time," he muttered. But he didn't shoot at it again. Molly noticed that, but said nothing. One night in the 3rd month, Molly woke to a sound outside the tent. Not the wind, not the sea, something else. A weight settling onto rock. She lay still and listened. Gracie was asleep beside her, breathing softly. Ray was snoring on the other side. The sound came again. The scrape of something hard against stone. Close, very close. Molly reached out slowly and opened the tent flap an inch. The bird was sitting on the rock shelf 10 feet away, still as stone. Its wings were folded and its head was turned toward the tent, its yellow eyes open and unblinking. It was bigger than she had realized from a distance. Standing on the rock, it came up to her chest. The talons gripped the stone, and each one was as long as her hand. Molly didn't move, didn't breathe. The bird watched her through the gap in the tent flap, and as she looked, neither moved for what felt like an eternity. Then the bird turned its head, slow and smooth, and looked at something Molly couldn't see. It opened its wings. The span of them blocked out the stars, and then it was gone. No sound of flight, no beating wings, just there and then not there, as though the dark had taken it back. Molly zipped the tent shut and lay down beside Gracie, putting her hand on her daughter's chest, feeling her heartbeat. She did not sleep again that night. She didn't tell Ray. Weeks passed. The eagle circled most days now. Ray watched it, but had stopped talking about shooting it. He watched it the way he used to talk about the police and the government, like it was part of a system arranged against him personally. He muttered about it at night, said it was smart, said it was waiting for them to drop their guard. Then one morning, Molly woke to find the camp torn apart. Tarps shredded, the food cache dragged from the tree where Ray had hung it and scattered across the rocks. Cans punctured and leaking, dried meat gone, blood on the stones, though nothing was dead. Just blood, dark and old-looking, smeared in lines that ended in prints Molly had never seen before. 3 toes, deep, each one ending in a gouge in the soft ground, talon marks that went down 2 inches. Ray stood in the middle of it all with his rifle and a face she had learned to stay away from. Molly held Gracie and said nothing. "Half the food," he said quietly. "Maybe more. This is that bird." "I know," she said quietly. "Don't say I know like you knew this was going to happen. You don't know anything." He kicked at the scattered supplies. "Get this cleaned up." Molly cleaned it up, sorted what was left, didn't mention that the prints were as long as her forearm, that no eagle she had ever heard of could tear through canvas like that, or that the blood on the rocks didn't seem to belong to anything in the camp. She kept these thoughts in a quiet place inside herself and carried on. Ray stopped sleeping after that. He sat by the fire all night with the rifle across his knees, staring out into the dark. During the day, he paced the beach, talked about the bird constantly. It was smart, he said. It was hunting them specifically. It had chosen them. He talked about it the way he used to talk about the authorities, about all the systems he believed were designed to control him. The bird had become another enemy to rage against. His drinking got worse. Every night, sometimes during the day. His hands shook in the mornings, and he snapped at everything Molly did. Chapter 4. Gracie. It happened in the 4th month, a morning like any other. Gray sky, low mist, the smell of salt and wet rock. "Go check the fish trap," Ray said. "Take the long way round. Check the stream too. See if the rains shifted any of the rocks." Molly looked at Gracie, who was sitting on her blanket near the tent, playing with shells. "I'll take Gracie. Leave her. She's fine. I'm right here." He was cleaning the rifle, didn't look up. "Go on. It'll take you 20 minutes. Molly hesitated. She always took Gracie. Always. But Ray was right there, 3 meters from the blanket. The fish trap needed checking, and the stream had been running high after the rain. Disagreeing with Ray about small things led to arguments about everything. "Go," he said. She kissed Gracie on the head, breathed her in, then walked away down the beach toward the rocks where the trap sat in the shallows. She checked the trap. 2 fish. She reset it the way Ray had shown her, then started along the stream, checking the banks where the water had risen. The rocks had shifted near the bend, so she spent a few minutes restacking them to keep the flow right. Normal work routine. She was thinking about lunch about whether the remaining canned food would stretch another week when something made her turn around. She couldn't have said what it was. A sound, maybe, carried on the wind, or the absence of a sound. The beach was 200 meters behind her, and from where she stood, she could see the camp, the tent, the thin line of smoke from the fire. She could see Gracie's blanket, and she could see that Gracie was alone on it. Ray wasn't beside the blanket. He wasn't by the tent. He was on the ridge above the beach, lying flat on his stomach with the rifle braced against a rock, aimed at the sky. Everything in Molly's body went cold at once. She understood in that single moment, standing by the stream with wet hands and fish scales on her fingers. She understood what Ray had done. He had sent her away. He had moved Gracie's blanket out into the open, away from the shelter of the tent, and he had climbed the ridge with his rifle, using their daughter as bait. Molly ran. She ran and she screamed. The sound that came out of her was not a word, was not her daughter's name, was just raw animal terror ripping out of her throat. The beach was wet sand and loose rocks. Her feet slipped. She fell, then got up, ran, and screamed again. She saw the mist part above the beach. She saw the shape drop through it, wings folded, falling fast, enormous, silent until the last moment when the wings opened and the air cracked with the force of them. She saw the talons reach forward, each one longer than Gracie's arm, and she saw Gracie on the blanket looking up with her mouth open, her hands reaching towards the sky. The bird hit the blanket. Gracie shrieked, a sound that went into Molly and would never leave. Talons closed around her daughter's body, and the wings beat once, twice, and the bird rose with Gracie in its grip, her daughter screaming, getting smaller, rising into the mist. The rifle cracked from the ridge, once, twice, both shots wild, hitting nothing. The bird climbed, banked, and disappeared. Gracie's cries faded until Molly couldn't tell them from the wind. Then there was only the sound of the sea and her own voice, still screaming, and the blanket on the sand, empty, wet with something she couldn't look at. She didn't remember falling. She was on the sand where the blanket lay, and her body had folded around the shape where her daughter should have been. She made sounds that weren't words, just raw noise coming out of her like something being torn from the earth by its roots. Chapter 5. After. Ray came down from the ridge. She heard his boots on the rocks, heard him stop. "I had the shot," he said. His voice was flat and strange. "I had it lined up, and then you started screaming. You spooked it. It changed its angle." Molly looked up at him from the sand. Her face was wet, and her chest was heaving, her hands full of the blanket that still smelled like her daughter. "You put her there," she managed. The slap came hard across her face. Molly's head snapped sideways. She tasted blood as she hit the ground, cheek pressed into the wet sand. Ray kicked her in the ribs. Not hard enough to break anything. Hard enough that the air left her body, curling around the pain. Then, his hand was in her hair, dragging her up, pulling her face close to his. "I would have killed it," he said. His breath was hot and sour. "She would be fine right now if you could have kept your mouth shut for 30 seconds. He held her there, on her knees in the sand, his fist wound in her hair. Molly looked into his eyes and saw nothing. No grief, no guilt, no recognition of what he had done. Just anger at being interrupted. Say, it was your fault. It was my fault. That's right. He let go of her hair. She fell forward onto the sand. He picked up the rifle and walked away, up the beach, toward the cliffs, looking for the bird, looking for something to kill that wasn't himself. Molly lay in the sand for a long time. The blanket was beside her and she pulled it to her face and breathed in Gracie's smell that was still there. Faint, but already fading. She lay there until the cold got into her bones. Finally, in resignation, she got up and walked to the tent. Sitting down, staring at nothing. The world had a hole in it shaped like her daughter, and Molly sat at the edge of that hole, understanding that she would never climb out of it. Ray came back hours later. His face was blank, and his eyes were dry. Found bones on the rocks, he said. Small, picked clean. Molly made a sound she didn't recognize. It's done. It happened. We can't change it. He rubbed his face with both hands. We're survivors, Molly. That's what we do. We survive things. He didn't say Gracie's name. When things settle down, he said, we'll try again, have another baby, start fresh. Molly looked at him, the man she had followed to the edge of the world, who had placed their daughter on a beach as bait for something that should not exist, who had looked away at the wrong moment, who had kicked her in the ribs while she lay in the sand where Gracie had been taken, who was now talking about starting fresh, like Gracie was a tent that had blown away in a storm. Okay, Molly said quietly. Good. He nodded once, then went to check the food supply. The days after Gracie were quiet. Ray talked about killing the bird. He planned. He obsessed. He set up watch points along the ridge, but he never said Gracie's name, not once. The bird had become the problem to solve, and Gracie had become the reason to solve it. He had converted his daughter's death into motivation without ever passing through grief. Molly watched him, said nothing, and did what she was told. She cleaned, she cooked, she hauled water, checked the fish trap, and maintained the camp. She gutted fish with clean strokes. She tied knots that held. She rebuilt what broke and improved what didn't. She was learning, but the learning had changed. In the beginning, she had learned because Ray demanded it. Now she learned because each skill was a small piece of something she was building inside herself, something she didn't yet have a name for. Ray drank. Every night he sat by the fire and finished a bottle and talked about the bird, about survival, about how the system had forced him into this. The officers, the charges, the warrants, all of it done to him. He never did anything. Things happened to Ray, and he responded. That was the story he told himself, the story he expected Molly to believe. This stew is good, he said one night. He'd eaten 2 bowls and was working on a third. You're finally getting somewhere with the cooking. Thank you, Molly said. 5 days after Gracie died, Molly picked up the second rifle. Ray was out on the ridge watching for the bird. Molly walked to where the rifle leaned against the rock shelf at the back of the tent. she had never touched it. Guns were Ray's territory, like the yacht had been Ray's territory, like every decision that had ever been made was Ray's territory. She picked it up, felt the weight settle into her hands. It was lighter than she expected. She found the safety with her thumb, clicked it off, then on again. Pulled the bolt back the way she had watched Ray do it 100 times, watching the brass of a round seat in the chamber. 5 rounds loaded, she closed the bolt, raised it to her shoulder, felt the stock against her cheekbone and looked down the barrel at the empty beach where Gracie's blanket had been. She put the rifle back exactly where it had been, angled the same way, resting on the same part of the rock. She stepped back and checked. No difference. Ray came back an hour later and didn't notice. Chapter 6. The beach. Ray was drunk by sunset. The kind of drunk where his words ran together, his eyes unable to hold on to anything. He had finished one bottle, started another, his body swaying as he sat by the fire, jaw loose, head tilting. "Feel better tonight," he said. "First time since all the shit." He meant Gracie. All the shit. That was his daughter's death. "You should rest," Molly said. "Early start tomorrow." "Yeah." He tried to stand. His legs buckled, and he caught himself. Tried again. Managed 3 steps before his body just folded. He went forward onto the sand, face down, and didn't move. The bottle fell from his hand as rum soaked into the ground beside his head. Molly sat by the fire and watched. His breathing was heavy and even. Deep, unconscious sleep, the kind you don't wake from for hours. She counted 60 breaths, watched his fingers for twitching. Nothing. He was gone. She stood up, walked to the tent, picked up the rifle, checked the chamber. 5 rounds. She walked back to where Ray lay in his drunken stupor by the dying fire. She stood over him. The sand was cold under her bare feet, and the sky was clear for the first time since they had arrived. Stars everywhere, more than she had ever seen. The air smelled of salt and smoke and rum. She looked down at him, the man who had brought her here, who had killed those officers and shrugged it off like brushing away a fly, who had watched the bird circling for weeks and refused to take it seriously until it destroyed their food, who had sent her away so he could put Gracie on a blanket alone and in the open, who had missed his shot, who had kicked her while she lay in the sand beside her daughter's empty blanket and forced her to say it was her fault, who wanted to simply make another baby like Gracie was replaceable. She raised the rifle to her shoulder. Ray's eyes opened, glassy, unfocused, but open. "What?" Molly fired. The recoil bit into her shoulder, but she kept her feet. Ray jerked once, hard, and then went still. Blood spread dark across the sand, black in the starlight. The echo of the shot rolled off the cliffs and came back, fading into nothing. Her hands were steady as she lowered the rifle. Her breathing was even, though she felt hollowed out, like a shell left on a beach after the creature inside it has died. She set the rifle down. She grabbed Ray's ankles and started to drag. He was heavy, much heavier than he looked, but Molly had hauled water, firewood, and seal carcasses for months. Her body was different now, and she pulled him across the sand without stopping. Past the fire, past the tent, out across the open beach, away from everything, until she reached a stretch of flat sand with nothing around it but sky. She let go of his ankles. He lay on his back with his eyes open and his mouth half-formed around a word he would never finish. Molly looked at his face, saw nothing there she recognized. She left him there on the empty beach under the stars and walked back to camp. She built the fire up high, made tea with the last of the clean water, sat drinking it, watching the stars, and waited. The sounds started around midnight, a heavy thump from somewhere down the beach, then tearing, the wet sound of something being opened. Molly held her cup with both hands and stared at the fire without looking. There were cracks, snaps. The bird made sounds she had never heard any bird make, low and resonant, almost like a voice. Almost, but not quite. Molly drank her tea. The sounds continued through the night, sometimes stopping, sometimes starting again. And somewhere in the darkest part of the early morning, Molly realized she was humming the lullaby her mother used to sing. For Gracie, only for Gracie. By dawn, silence. Molly walked down the beach as the sun came through the mist, thin and pale and offering no warmth. The bird was gone. Where Ray had been, bones lay scattered across the sand, white, picked clean. If she hadn't known they were human, she wouldn't have guessed. They looked like driftwood, like something the sea would take. She had already planned it. While Ray drank, ranted, and slept, Molly had thought through every step with the same careful attention she gave to tying knots and gutting fish. She threw the rifle off the south cliff and watched it turn end over end, disappearing into the surf below. She gathered the bones from the beach and scattered them into the sea. She found the spent casing in the sand beside the fire and threw it into the water. She cleaned the blood from the sand with seawater until no trace remained. All that was left was a woman alone on a beach. The eagle had taken Gracie. The island had taken Ray. That was the story. That was all anyone would ever know. Chapter 7. Rescue. Molly kept the fire burning constantly. The Coast Guard found her 8 days later. A helicopter first, then a boat. 2 men and a woman in high-vis vests who came ashore and found her, thin, sunburned, calm. "How long have you been here?" the woman asked. "I don't know," Molly said. Her voice was steady and quiet. "Our yacht wrecked. My baby died. My partner went looking for help along the coast and didn't come back. They wrapped her in blankets, gave her water, asked questions in careful voices, the way people talk to someone they think might break. Molly answered everything. She cried when she talked about Gracie. Real tears, real grief. That part required no performance at all. They searched the island, found the remains of the yacht, half sunk on the rocks, found the camp, found Gracie's blanket, which Molly had folded and placed inside the tent. They did not find Ray. The coastline was rough, and the cliffs were high. The water was deep and cold, and the captain told Molly that a fall in this terrain, in these conditions, would leave very little to find. "I know," she whispered. They took her back to the mainland. There were interviews and investigations, people in offices asking her to go over it again, one more time, from the beginning, Molly told the same story each time, because it was simple. Because the truth was close enough to touch. Her partner was wanted for the murder of 2 police officers. She had been coerced, controlled, taken against her will. A young mother, trapped by a violent man who had lost everything and survived anyway. The news ran her photo and called her brave. Her family held her and called her a miracle. Nobody called her a killer. Nobody even thought to ask. Molly got a flat in a quiet suburb, a job at a library, shelving books and making tea in the staff room. She ate lunch alone and went home to an empty apartment where no one told her what to do. Sometimes at night she stood at the kitchen window watching the sky. Something in her face would change, just for a moment. Something that anyone watching would have struggled to name. Then she would close the curtain and go to bed. She didn't hum the lullaby anymore. Some things were too precious to repeat, and the sound of it belonged to a night that was hers alone. She thought about what she had learned on that island. How to gut a fish, how to tie a knot that holds, how to load a rifle, how to wait, how to look at someone and show them exactly what they expected to see. Ray had taught her everything, every single thing she needed. He just never understood what the lessons were for. The Auckland Islands kept their secrets. The bird still hunted somewhere in that mist, patient, ancient, and wrong. But Molly kept living, quiet now, careful, shaped into something that would never break and never bend and never trust again. Gracie was gone. Ray was gone. Only a memory remained.